Hi everyone. Hello. Buenas noches. Good evening. All right. How's everybody feeling? Very good. All right. Hope you're all anxiously waiting to hear some great poetry. My name is Ivan Salinas. I'm the program's coordinator here at Beyond Baroque. I want to welcome you to the Wanda Coleman Theater. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with our space, we're a nonprofit literary arts organization established in 1968 by Church Jerry Smith. The organization first began as an experimental literary magazine, which evolved into the interdisciplinary art space we know today. First, having a small storefront just a few blocks away in Abbot Kinney, we're now housed in the original Venice City Hall. Since the late 70s, that's when poets took it over and reimagined this as a place for art and community. I'd like to acknowledge our presence on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Tongva peoples. Venice is the original home of the Wanga, Tsanga, Tongva villages. We stand in solidarity with indigenous peoples affected by colonial forces and are committed to uplifting their stories and cultures. Just a few announcements before we get started with the celebration of Poetry International. You can keep up with our slate of events for the next couple of months through our website. And on your way out, you can pick up a small print calendar we've put together. Next week, we'll kick off Black History Month with a vibrant performance by Lucas Rivera, exploring his Afro-Puerto Rican heritage through spoken word. A jazz night with Dwight Tribble of the World Stage, presented by the As Is Rebel Jazz Fest. And on February 16, we'll be hosting a special tribute to American poet Dorothy Baresi. You can also come see Texas State Poet Laureate Irene Lara Silva, celebrating her new collection, The Eaters of Flowers. And we'll be closing out the month with Jose Hernandez Diaz's book launch of his second collection and a mini art festival and poetry reading in collaboration with Skew Magazine, highlighting Black artists and publishers. We also offer workshops, both generative, paid workshops. Next month, we'll host Douglas Manuel and Jose Hernandez Diaz. And every week on Zoom, you can sign up for our Wednesday night poetry workshop with Ellie Johnson and our Monday night fiction workshop with Raquel Baker. It's all possible thanks to your support. We've thrived over 55 years, long before I was born. And thanks to the support of the community. And that's a privilege to be here. So you can keep on doing so by becoming a member. Our general memberships start at $60 with a few discounts for seniors and students. And you can inquire more info about that on our bookstore with our lovely bookstore assistant, Genesis Perez. And this is a great moment to shout out the team at Beyond Baroque, our tech director, Eric Alberg, our executive director, Quentin Ring, associate director, Jimmy Vega, Genesis Press, our intern, Simone, who you all can meet tonight, and just want to give him a shout out. Thank you. All right. Tonight is about this amazing, thick anthology of Poetry International celebrating 25 years. Thank you to our features of the evening. I hope you're all ready to hear some wonderful poetry. I will pass the word along to the editor-in-chief of Poetry International, Sandra Alcosser. And just so that you know a few things about her, her poems have been published in the New Yorker, the Paris Review, Poetry, and the Pushcart Prize Anthology. She's received 2 individual artist fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, and her books of poetry, A Fish to Feed All Hunger and Except by Nature, received the highest honors from National Poetry Series and the Academy of American Poets. Her 4 artist book collaborations with Brighton Press have been exhibited internationally and reside in museums and special collections, including the National Museum of Women in the Arts and the Musée des Arts American Giverny. She founded and directs SDSU's MFA each spring and is the editor-in-chief of Poetry International. Please give a warm welcome to our host, Sandra Alcosser.
Thank you all for coming here to celebrate our 25th anniversary of Poetry International. And thank you to the whole Beyond Baroque team, incredibly kind and generous. I didn't know what this was going to be when we started putting it together. We really just started looking back through 25 years. But the new part of the journal is really a celebration of cities. It was put together during the pandemic, and I was actually in the place that I've just come from. We have a 30-acre tree farm in the Bitterroots of Montana, and I just got down here at 3 o'clock this morning from a hellacious drive from Montana. But what was so wonderful about it was to have these cities coming into the forest where I live. And at a time when the cities of the world are under assault, borders lined with families seeking shelter, seas warming, rising, causing uplift, tornadoes. I drove through Nevada coming down here last summer for the fall semester and drove through a tornado. I had no idea what was going to happen. Famine, drought. So at this moment, we're reminded of the importance of bearing witness to what contributing editor Jenny Minetti Shippey for this issue called The Mystery of Our Own Histories. In a letter to Boccaccio in the 14th century, Petrarch suggested that poets must write just as the bees make honey, not keeping the flowers, but turning them into a sweetness of our own, blending many different flavors into one, which shall be like them all and better. And the city, with its myriad winding stairs and unlit alleys, lace shops and pastry displays, layered pavements of granite and gneiss, is, after all, the poet's honeycomb. For many poets, home is the city itself. Auden even narrowed that down further. He said, the self is a city, a cell where we make use of our comfort and despair. We make something of it. Anna Akhmatova, who suffered greatly under Soviet rule, remained wedded to St. Petersburg and wrote, even after the murder of her first husband, "I'm not among those who abandoned this land. No one wants to help us because we stayed home. Because loving our city and not winged freedom, we preserve for ourselves its palaces, its fire and water." These are all, the brightest I'm mentioning are in, not always exactly what I'm saying here, but are in this journal. One hears an echo of this with Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish in the poem, "I Belong There." To break the rules, I've learned all the words needed for a trial by blood. I've learned and dismantled all the words in order to draw from them a single word, home. Poets from Charles Baudelaire to Borges followed Poe's short story, The Man of the Crowd, as the invention of carbon-arced street lamps permitted Poe to wander among the dimly lit faces of city boulevards. Baudelaire, who believed himself the alchemist of the world, initiated the poetry of the modern city when he wrote of Paris and Fleur de Mal, "You gave me your mire, and I turned it into gold." The photographer Nadar described Baudelaire in Walter Benjamin's The Arcades Project, which is a fabulous book if you like the stories of the flaneurs and so forth. With rose-colored gloves, quite new, thus arrayed and hatless, Baudelaire walked about his quartier of the city at an uneven pace, both nervous and languid, like a cat choosing each stone of the pavement, as if he had to avoid crushing an egg. Of course, not every poet rejoices in the fluidity of playing flaneur in the arcades of Paris. The Brazilian poet Adélia Prado contends that she's never been at ease in her city. I'm from the Middle Ages, and Givernopolis sometimes strikes me as silly. It's always felt too new. There's no seeping stonework, no antiques. The lack of history almost makes it not a real city. I'm fascinated by really old cities, but I discovered that the Givernopolis in my poems, the city of my childhood, is something else, almost a dream of itself. Because I find the smell of newness distressing, my soul is medieval, and so is my writing. And when this happens, a poet might turn away from the page and enter another city, itself a dream, to wander as Kevin Pruford does in our opening portfolio. So all of the portfolios other than Kevin's are translations. And I was thinking that I was going to theme this around the city, but it was really, Kevin and I just exchanged an email over something, and he sent me these poems about the city, and I decided, yes, this really is going to be the theme. So if the folks in the back could show, we're going to have a number of talking heads here, a number of visitors. This is from Kevin Pruford's new book, From the Cities, the Armies, and it's on page 26 of the journal, and it opens the journal.
Hi, I'm Kevin Pruford, and this is my poem, The Cities, the Armies, from the new issue of Poetry International. The cities, the armies. In the bright days of ancient Rome, when a child was born unwanted, her father might choose exposure, which meant he might abandon the infant in the forest where eventually she would no longer be a burden to the family. For years, I tried to understand the mind that could be right with this. A child in the leaves, crying into the night, the hungry wolves. I could not understand it. But there it was in the history books. The Romans have spoken to me over the centuries, and I have listened carefully, and loved them more than I have loved even my friends. They whisper into my ear, and I write down every word they say, and have made a career of it, made a convenience of them. What excites me most is their apparent familiarity that doesn't quite conceal their foreignness. They are a foreign mind, an alien mind. They who could expose a child so easily, and thus make resonant the stories of Moses, of Romulus and Remus, of Oedipus or Hercules. Fuck, I have lived 50 years and hope I have done as little harm as possible, though I doubt it. My mother inherited her mother's senility, by which I mean she loses her glasses all the time, and probably will eventually forget who I am. I do not want forgetfulness for myself, though I suppose in a broader sense, it might be a mercy to forget who we once were. These days, she reads the same book over and over and seems happy with that. It is a book I gave her about the many empires that preceded us. Listen to this, she keeps saying. Can you imagine the armies? Can you imagine the cities these people once built?
One might not be content with a single city, but wander many, as the Haitian writer Louis Philippe Delamet does in another new portfolio, calling himself a self-proclaimed vagabond. We'd hoped to have the poet himself read the poem in French, but he wrote to his translator, wonderful translator, who's doing another Peace Force in Poetry International 29. He said, I don't know if I told you, but I don't have a cell phone. And since I'm writing a new novel, unfortunately, I won't have time to learn how to record it on my computer. I'm sorry. It will be for next time. I kiss you. Louise Philip Dallenbart. And this is from Don't Be Afraid, and it's on page 76. Oh, no. No. That's Kwame Dawes. It's the one that says Nancy Naomi Carlson.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to say it. I'm an immigrant, a boat people, a border crosser, a piece of dirt, the one to blame for all ills wherever I go, the one you sometimes fetch, then send back home when no longer of any use. I'm a Kleenex man, a toilet paper woman, a fly you expel with a wave of your hand, a cloud you burst to rekindle the sun, or so you let the common folk believe. I'm the one who sometimes comes, for better or worse, to knock at your door when you're having family dinner, evicted by scores of tsunamis from his own home. The woman who catches the scraps you toss her way while you huddle behind your cathode ray shield. The woman who's braved the elements to come knock at your door. Don't be afraid to say it. I'm an immigrant person, a Palestinian without a sukkah to plant his roaming, a Tibetan without a name, a Haitian woman with fallow dreams, driven back wherever she goes. Don't be afraid. I'm like you, a human being.
I'm sorry, somehow Louise Philippe's photograph was missing. A really charming photograph. One of the other portfolios explores the literary wealth of the Armenian diaspora as we visit the Armenian, in this case, community of Fresno, California, in a poem by Aram Saroyan writing of his father, William Saroyan, and his friend. Saroyan reminds us that even among uprisings and meteoric climbs to celebrity, the endurance of kinship remains the strongest. And this poem is on page 96.
Saroyan and Manassian. Reading of Waipo and Tufu, I think of my father and his cousin, Archie. Of Manassian and Saroyan, two strange friends from their Fresno childhoods. Then one climbed the heights, while the other only a painter's ladder. Yet each set his sights on the same prize, a simple delight in the language that made a poem, or a poem in prose. How they cracked one another up, laughing as if life weren't sad at all, but touched by magic.
So, following the new translations shared by contemporary poets and portfolios set in El Salvador, Haiti, Iceland, Armenia, and Spain, we begin the celebration of the last 25 years of Poetry International with works selected by our editorial assistants and interns. We have a couple of them here. Where are you?
I'm here.
There you are. Do you want to stand up and introduce yourself, Luis?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Torres. I have the privilege of serving as the submissions manager for Poetry International Yeah, I'm honored to be here. So.
And he's a wonderful poet.
Thank you.
So, and Sam, where are you?
I'm over here.
Yes. You want to talk about what you do, Sam, with Poetry International?
So I'm the production editor of the print edition of Poetry International, and we're hard at work on PI 29, and I've had the privilege of working with Sandra on putting that together and curating it. So yeah, we're hoping to get that to you guys very soon.
And we're blessed in this way in that Sam was sent to us by our own Sarah Maclay. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you. There's single poems throughout the rest of the journal, and then a prose section put together by Katie Ferris, and then a closing with essays, and you'll be hearing a piece of one of the essays a little bit later. But one of the poems is by Kwame Dawes, the poet and novelist from Ghana, then Jamaica, and now professor at the University of Nebraska and editor of Prairie Schooner. So that was the one that was on before. Yes, there's one.
Hello, my name is Kwame Dawes, and I'm going to read a poem which is being published in Poetry International. The poem is titled Leneg de Papi. These days I study old photographs and collect those with bodies facing away, their backs, their heavy coats, their shawls and hats, as they move in crowds through cities covered in snow, or slick with rain, or washed in plain light. And I imagine these are the bodies of Black people, recolonizing the imagination. And this is how I find my company here, far from home, how I show love, how I feel safe. Every back, it seems, is a blood neighbor. Thank you.
Kwame really is the busiest person in the literary world, I think. Maybe next to Ilya Kaminsky. We were fortunate to have Ilya as the editor-in-chief of Poetry International for 12 years. I happened to be on the nominating committee for the Whiting Prize that year, and I came across, he received a Whiting Award, and I said, this is the guy for Poetry International, and he gave so much, he brought so much to that journal, and he's still, he's the emeritus editor, but he's still an advisor to the journal and always pointing poets from around the world our way. We're equally fortunate now to have Blas Falconer. Blas came as a visiting writer and just really transformed our program. Students would come to me and say, I love you, I love Ilya. This other guy, he's really doing something that you're not doing. And so I knew he was a person that, he would be a good person for our program. And so when I knew that Ilya was leaving, we used to get together for lunch, and I said, okay, what are we going to do about translation? Because it's so important for where we are, who we are as a program. And so we both started doing translation so that we could actually teach translation and know a bit more about it. And Blas has written a very nice introduction to the poet I'm about to introduce. It's in the book, and he talks about how he found a poet with a similar aesthetic and a theme that he was working on himself, and that poet was Mariano Zaro, who's here now, and his Padre Tierra, a poem in 50 sections. I'm going to read, I like his intro, but I'm not going to take the time to read it. One of the things he talks about was, it was during the pandemic, and his mother came to visit for a week, and his mother's from Puerto Rico, and the pandemic struck, and she was there for 8 months. And so she served as one of the experts on this. And he writes this bio for Mariano. The author of 6 poetry collections, Mariano Zaro earned a PhD in linguistics from the University of Granada, Spain, and a master's in literature from the University of Zaragoza, Spain. He's a professor of Spanish at Rio Hondo Community College in Whittier, California. I reached out to Mariano, who also happens to live in Los Angeles, congratulating him on the publication of the new book, letting him know how much I admired the work, and that summer we began a regular correspondence. I'd send him a handful of translations, and he'd respond, noting where he liked a particular line or phrase and where I'd misunderstood what was happening. Maybe, Mariano, you want to share the example that he gives about the quince and so forth. But everyone, please welcome Mariano Zaro.
Thank you very much for this introduction and this invitation. Thank everybody for being here today. I was very lucky to have Blas contacting me and offering the gift of translation. The book, this little book, Padre Tierra, was published in Zaragoza, Spain, at the end of 2019. We worked over the summer and we did phone calls. So Blas did a brilliant translation. Blas is in Paris right now, so we have Sarah Maclay, who is going to read the English version, which is Blas' version, and I'm going to read the Spanish version of Padre Tierra. We have selected few sections. It's a one book poem in 50 segments. We're going to read few of them. Padre Tierra. Entras a mi cuarto de niño, Padre Tierra, tengo fiebre, no he ido a la escuela, me duele la luz más allá de los ojos. Entras como toro prudente y contenido, traes el frío de los montes trenzado en la ropa. Traes el espliego, la plata del olivo, la vid, el viaje de los pámpanos, ácidos, curvos, tercos de lumbre y mosto. Te acercas, me besas la frente, eres termómetro y bálsamo, 1000 veces bendigo esta fiebre sonámbula.
You come into my room, Padre Tierra. I have a fever. I did not go to school. The light hits more than my eyes. You come in like a bull, careful and restrained. You bring the cold of mountains woven into your clothes. You bring lavender, the olive tree's silver, the vines climbing, caustic, curled, stubborn with fire and must. You come close, kiss my forehead. You are thermometer and balm. Bless 1,000 times this fever, sleepwalking.
Peregrinos, penitentes, procesionarios, los caracoles salen tras la lluvia. Parece que salen a tu encuentro, Padre Tierra. Yo los miro pegado a tus rodillas. A veces pones uno en la palma de mi mano que brilla como una patena. Los caracoles son macho y hembra a la vez, me dices. Yo miro la espiral del caparazón, hipnotizado.
Pilgrims, penitents, in procession the snails come out after the rain, and it seems they want to meet you, Padre Tierra. At your side, I look at them. Sometimes you put one in the palm of my hand, and it shines like a paten. Snails are male and female, both, you say. I look at the spiral shell, hypnotized.
Mi mano es pequeña. No puedo, como tú, desatar la soga húmeda, la furia de la tormenta. Tampoco puedo esperar sin ansia el despertar de bulbos encamados en cajas de cartón todo el invierno. No puedo creer el regreso feliz de los frutos tras la pereza o sueño del barbecho. No puedo respirar bajo la cellisca, arrancar sin rencor los abrojos.
My hand is little. I can't, like you, untie the wet rope in the storm's fury. I can't trust that the bulbs, boxed in cardboard cartons all winter, will awaken. I can't imagine the happy return of fruit after the long sleep of the fallow land. I can't breathe in the sleet, tear out without rancor the thistles.
Los animales de la casa duermen sin miedo. No olvides darles de comer, cambiar el agua, eso me dices, Padre Tierra. Los caballos saben lo que nos pasa por dentro, también lo saben las golondrinas y la hiedra de las tapias, aunque nosotros no entendamos. Cerca del granero hay un baúl, lleno y vacío. Me das la llave, la recibo como un tatuaje.
The livestock sleep without fear. Don't forget to give them something to eat. Change the water. That's what you tell me, Padre Tierra. Horses know what happens within us. Swallows know too. And ivy on the garden wall, even if we don't understand. Near the barn there is a trunk, full and empty. You give me the key. I take it like a tattoo.
And this is the last section. Me cuentas cosas de tu infancia, Padre Tierra. La nieve en los tejados congelada, sobrepasando los aleros, convirtiendo en túneles las calles. Un cura no te da la comunión porque bebiste agua de una fuente y tenías que estar en ayunas. Pero es un niño, tenía sed, te defienden las vecinas. Eres un niño, hablas del pan de azúcar, de la miel sobre los higos. Te seguimos hasta que se hace de noche y tu madre te llama desde la ventana y nos quedamos mirando las nubes alargadas. Caminamos juntos, el reloj da la hora, los niños dicen adiós, el pueblo se queda vacío.
You tell me things about your childhood, Padre Tierra. Snow on the roofs, frozen, hanging over the eaves, turning the streets into tunnels. A priest does not give you communion because you drank water from a fountain and should have been fasting. But he's a child. He was thirsty. The neighbors defend you. You are a child. You talk about sweet bread, about honey on figs. We follow you until night falls, and your mother calls you from the window, and we wait, watching the clouds elongate. We walk together. The clock strikes the hour. The children say goodbye. the town is left empty.
Thank you very much.
I told Mariano, I understand why Blas selected that and why it resonated. You both have, you and Blas both have this really breathless, reflective poetry full of silences and full of space that invite a reader in, and really quite beautiful. I wish Blas was here, but he's having a wonderful time in Paris without us. He is now the editor of PI Online. And what PI Online, Poetry International Online, does, and please visit it, is they print single poems or little clusters of poems, but not full portfolios, and occasional translations. The print journal does primarily translations and award winners. But dispatches and book reviews and interviews. So if any of you are interested in that, you might want to go to Submittable and look at the guidelines of the protocols for doing that. We have with us today, as well as a reader of Mariano's poems, a woman who was, for many years, the book review editor of Poetry International, and that is Sarah Maclay. We've had many wonderful Los Angeles collaborators, and I hope there are people in the audience who are interested in joining us over at the Journal. Please get in touch with me if you are. Sarah and I also have in common that we live in Carlton in Florence, Montana, and teach in California, but you spend more time in Los Angeles than I spend in Solana Beach. She went on to write an essay that we featured in the anniversary issue titled Intimacy and Interiority. Sarah has just published her 5th book of poetry, Nightfall Marginalia, and she will be reading part of the essay, Intimacy and Interiority, and then one of the poems from Nightfall Marginalia, The Hidden Springs, which I don't know if it's true, but I had a sense there's something that reminds me very much of being in Venice. This Venice. I don't know if that is true, but she's going to be reading that for you tonight, too. So please welcome back to the podium, Sarah Maclay.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm really happy that we in Venice at Beyond Baroque are now making the regional connection with Poetry International, located in San Diego, but beyond. So thanks to all the Beyond Baroque folks for being part of making this happen. Before I start reading, I also need to pay tribute to one other key figure from the history of Poetry International, Bruce Boston, who was my first contact with the Journal after we met each other at this amazing 3-day birthday party for Czesław Miłosz in Claremont, where all these amazing people like Merwin and Haas and Seamus Haney and Jane Hirschfeld and Linda Gregg were presenting and reading. And Bruce and I got to know each other on the breaks, just as Poetry International, I think, was going into its maybe 2nd year. And so not long after that, I also met Fred Maramarco, who was the original editor. And after a few years, after some of my poems had been published there, Bruce knew that I was also really enjoying writing essays about poetry. And so, as he would put it, he inveigled me into being the book review editor. It was more pleasant than that. But unfortunately, he and his artist wife, Marcia, are no longer with us, and I really miss them. Wonderful guy. So I just needed to make that tribute also. So this is going to be an unusual reading for me because I don't usually read from my essays, but some of you in the audience have actually heard me do that before, and it worked out okay, so don't worry. But this is one of the things about Poetry International. There's a very healthy review and criticism section in the back, and that doesn't always happen with journals. And sometimes when I was working on it, it was 65 pages. So it's amazing to have so much work being reviewed and thought about, as well as appearing for the first time. So this is just a little taste of that part of Poetry International. So this is the beginning of intimacy and interiority. It was autumn. There had been fog and food, good conversation, and I was sitting in a train, not facing ahead, but backward, watching the landscape and seascape retreat as I paged through my precious cargo, a book, also moving backward, toward the front of the book from the middle, which seemed for some reason in this moment right. In this way, I entered the world of Inger Christensen, a liminal realm, in this liminal realm, a realm of transit, moving towards some unseen future, looking inexorably back, looking into the near past, the past as it fell in its permanent swaths and fled. In another autumn, I could still remember how this felt, how I had been carried to a place so deeply interior that I can still locate its exact emotional space, or the one it opened in me, and it's attached to a cigarette, an outdoor spot like a park, and a relationship hinged to a sense of disconnection, subtext, something about to dissolve, or to open, or something that had changed, or that had to be hidden, something important, complicated, or something burgeoning before definition, something in need of protection. A moment told almost entirely in its glances and snippets, as though the camera had been trained away from the normal focal point, the script from narrative, from backstory. No headshots, please, but gesture, all the ephemera of a moment. Subplot, extras, yes. Shot, perhaps, from the view of the feet. Embrace of chance, object as souvenir, the smallest things. Into the trapdoor of opening, of closing, of change. Seen in sidelong glances from the corners of the eyes. And as I open the book again and find my way to the middle and move backwards towards the front, that same feeling, it's right there, as though the book is a vault for this feeling, containing, at least in its center, mostly space. These poems are elliptical in this section of Grass, translated by Susanna Need, to the point of being almost terse, yet without that feeling. They open rather than tighten. And it's not message, we'll find, as much as extreme lyric concision. All that is distilled, withheld, unspoken in the first half of this book, balanced by the loosened, unfettered cascades of the last, as though all that was inner will move into expulsion, exhale the explicit thought, bound quickly, as in a flood, to whatever dislodged boot is scooting by. But here, distillation pulls us into the shock of encounter, where so much is implication, to intimacy below the level of speech. By the road. Choosing acceptable knolls for a short cigarette break. Talking of birches' leaves because it is birches we see. Birches with fluttering leaves along the white trunks. Talking of other birches with naked trunks. talking of years, the space between us. Maybe it's empty. Seeing a group of children come up, hearing them ask the way, saying yes and seeing them run, embarrassed, smiling, run in the right direction, crushing the cigarette's glow in the sand where they ran, trying to go on ourselves, between us. The focus is on the verbs, choosing, talking, seeing, hearing, saying, crushing, trying, on what is being done, on the doing. There's a little short story here, one that seems so casual and yet perhaps heartbreaking, the climax of crushing held well away from melodrama because, after all, they are just putting out their cigarettes. But also the momentarily allowed, if deflected, glow, or perhaps its absence. Do the cigarettes carry the glow no longer in this maybe empty space between us? One could write great gusts about symbol and metonymy here, of course, but the thing is that it's the absolutely casual and quotidian and understated seeming normalcy of the moment, at least as it could be observed from the outside, say, in a medium shot or a long, as well as the restraint of the two smokers, that gives us this line, this moment, its power, on the way to those precarious last ones, moving the whole poem in two simple words, between us, into another zone, another room of rhetoric, into the interstitial, where much of the unuttered and internal action of the poem is occurring all along. And even while the figures of the poem must talk politely, presumably cannot touch, the knolls must be acceptable, and only the birch trunks can be naked, still, there is no I or you in this poem, only an us. The remembered snippets of moment told quickly in fragments, as though the speaker is referencing postcards, all begin with actions and only imply their subjects. But in all cases, they are plural, the adults always in second person, even the children are plural. And why embarrassed? Embarrassed to speak to adults? Or embarrassed and smiling because they sense something unspoken between them that they do not yet have words for? And perhaps, after all, the adults don't either. The pronouns speak to nothing, if not togetherness. And yet this adult togetherness feels fragile. It's just a cigarette break. And it's not. Together, likewise, plays as a title, ironically, against the poem that follows. Together. And footsteps behind me, back there, footsteps. I do not hear them. I walk so quickly in a rain of tar, drag myself in towards the back, press my body to the body of the house, stand with all that's crumbled, stuck tightly to my being. The imagery is unadorned, yet comes at us strangely in a rain of tar, which suddenly gives us a feeling for the difficulty of walking so thickly, while under the influence of this apparently unexpected, unanticipated, unwanted emotional gust. The speaker can barely make it to the house due to all that's crumbled. Once there, even in the rain, or the feeling of rain, she can't even make it inside. The body leans on the body of the house, each line's corrective repetition enacting the difficulty of the movement, as the words themselves cannot seem to step cleanly and completely into their individual lines, but must drag themselves a few more inches before letting go, while with each line and with each repetition, what is perceived must be subject to revision. And unlike the pronouns in By the Road, here, in a poem called Togetherness, there is no us, there is no we. I and my are countered by them, which could refer to the footsteps of one or more than one other person. Something has happened, or some unwanted discovery made. We don't know what exactly. The poem begins in medias res and then continues breathlessly, as though even to attempt punctuation here is too much emotional effort for the emotional moment we're allowed to enter, and would somehow misrepresent it, just as it can't be bothered with explaining or describing what has just happened. The extremis that the speaker has unwittingly stepped into is simply too great. And what togetherness are we left with? What is stuck tightly to her being? Not the maker of those footsteps, not another being, but the inanimate, the body of the house and all that has crumbled. If there is other distant togetherness, it no longer involves her, or perhaps, for unknown reasons, she's had to flee it. The title frames and refracts the speaker's shock, despair, and spectacular disorientation. The irony is as sharp as the pain, and we are let completely into it. Beyond the content of intimacy, the content we might associate with that word, beyond images and story and risk of disclosure, which may or may not feel intimate in the moment of apprehension, there's another rung of intimacy, of inwardness between writer and reader, made possible not necessarily because of what is revealed, however intimate, since, as with the happenstance of birch leaves, for instance, it is nearly chance, but with the way we are let into a zone of shining interiority, seemingly as it happens and as it exists within the tangible souvenirs of time, just enough of them, with the way this allows us to feel what Mary Ruefle sometimes calls the naked center. It is not that these poems draw us in because of abundant detail or hyper-confessionalism. Their willingness to be vulnerable is tangible, but the accompanying level of exterior spectacle is consciously very small. The voices of these poems don't come to us magnified over the intercom. These poems do not announce themselves. They do not yell, are not flashy, do not interrupt. They are not loud. Instead, they let us in, as though a gate were cracked so slightly ajar that only an alert or curious or momentarily distracted pedestrian might find the way to the opening. They beckon, they allow, they invite, or it's as though we hear the voices whistling from within the secret place below a hill, from below a door in the mountain, to quote Valentine. Little needs to be said there, or just enough. As Christensen says in her poem, To Go In, to point at the door without knowing it, to go into the mountain and it is you, and there is always room, and it is always open, and it is you that is open, without knowing it, endlessly open. So along with the theme of intimacy, I'm going to just end with a poem of mine that appeared in Poetry International Online last year, and it's one of the poems collected in Nightfall Marginalia. The Hidden Springs. The water, clean, cool. You like to sit on the steps, stick your feet in. You've even mentioned in some interview that it's your favorite place to sit, just off the kitchen, in the center of the house, instead of stairs going down to the basement. When you open the door, steps down to canals, as though a long cave opens, lit by sunlight from one point that fans out into a whole city, like a modern Bruges. You could spend hours there. You ask me why I've never asked to come to this place. I say I've always longed to, but thought it was private, that it should be a place you'd take me only if you wanted, not a place that I should ask to see. And as we sit on your steps with our feet in the water, a strange deer walks past, big as a moose, but antlers like an elk, maybe 8 points each. I can't explain the movement. It's so slow. Majestic comes to mind, but that's not majestic enough. I have a feeling for a moment that the elk is God, a God that we can watch. I think there's light in the antlers. Amaranth springs up as you wonder about Paris. Those purple sprigs begin to sprout, and how did I know it was here that we were when the water erupted too from my center as you held me close on your lap? It's enough, maybe, to know it exists, to know just once. May I not be greedy for what was.
We have another, in addition to Blas Falconer and Sam and Luis, we have another new addition to, sort of an old addition but new addition to the Poetry International, and that's Piotr Florschik, another LA collaborator, friend, former student, who has published 24 volumes of poetry, prose, and translations, and who has just been made the Eastern European editor for Poetry International, as well as having been awarded a fellowship and residency by the Wisława Szymborska Foundation, which means he will soon be living for a time in Szymborska's apartment. You have to write a dispatch for Poetry International about that. Piotr teaches global literary studies at the University of Washington, Seattle, and lives here with his family in Los Angeles. And he is going to give you a taste of what's coming in Poetry International 29. I don't like those themed issues, or I don't like appearing in those themed issues, the ones like against violence, or, I mean, they're all justified, but something bothers me about that. But what I do like is pulling things together and putting portfolios in conversation and artists in conversation with each other. And so in this, in 29, it's focusing on memory. And so I asked him if he would read something from Anna Zweir's Building the Barricade, and he's reading also another poem from a new book that's coming out. So, Piotr.
Thank you, Sandra. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It's good to be back in this space, this wonderful space. As Sandra mentioned, I first got involved with PI almost exactly 20 years ago when I entered the MFA program at San Diego State in the fall of 2004. I was as green as it gets, but I soon found a wonderful home there. I'll read two poems from Anna Swerszczynska's, aka Anna Zweir's Building the Barricade. If you don't know the book, it's a seminal volume of poetry of witness, world literature, a little over 100 poems, divided into 3 sections, roughly corresponding to the trajectory of the Warsaw 1944 uprising, in which Swerszczynska served as a military nurse. These 2 poems, they're both from the final section in which she documents, records the ensuing aftermath, if you will, the defeat and the aftermath of the uprising. I'll read one of the poems in Polish as well. My lice, as in Lice. My lice. I run through the streets of corpses. I jump over corpses. On the chest under my blouse, warm lice move. Only they and I are alive. It's what brings us together. They give me their movements in the city of corpses, where nothing moves anymore. Weak like me, they want to live like I do. But when I run out of the city of corpses, when a living human opens for me the door of a living house, I'll toss into the fire the blouse with lice, which like me wanted to live. This poem, my favorite from the collection, is called Man and Centipede. I'll read it in English first, then in Polish. I will survive. I'll find the deepest basement, shut myself inside, won't let anybody in. I'll dig a hole in the ground, chew out the bricks. I'll hide in the wall. I'll go into the wall like a centipede. Everyone will die and I will survive. Człowiek i stonoga. Ja przeżyję. Znajdę taką najgłębszą piwnicę, zamknę się, nie wpuszczę nikogo, wygrzebię w ziemi jamę, zębami wygryzę cegły, schowam się w murze, wejdę w mur jak stonoga. Wszyscy umrą, a ja przeżyję. And this is a poem, a contemporary poet's poem, Jerzy Jarniewicz, born in 1958. A selection of his poems in my translation came out this past fall. He's going to be here in the States in April. So if you happen to be in Seattle, Denver, Madison, Cleveland, or New York, come out and say hi. Wind blowing through the holes. My first country, where Hitler stamps are a currency exchangeable like an ivory in the outposts of white missionaries. 5 stamps for a rope of beads and a round of prayers for every execution in the family. Mother remembers standing against the wall, but she's alive because he was a good German, so there'll be no prayers. From that time, I inherited a helmet full of holes that's vintage Nazi and a bayonet. Who could have sensed that as we were saying goodbye, a rocket barrage would level half of our city? In the other, a rat is hiding, our silent ally, who spied on us while we, gazing into each other's eyes, made love. And with this picture in his brain, he'll live a moment longer. Thank you.
So, Piotr, how many, I'm trying to remember how many poets you have in the portfolio that's coming up.
7, 8 or so.
So, yes. And then the next issue after that, 30th, we're bringing in, this is another former student of mine, wonderful poet, from the Flathead Reservation, Heather Cahoon, and she is going to become the Indigenous poetic editor for Poetry International as well. So now to close, and then I would like to invite all of the PI staff people and Mariano up, and if any of you have any questions, if we have a few minutes, if you'll indulge us that way, I thought I would open the floor to questions. So the next person, I have two old friends that I've loved their poetry first, and came to know them well. And one is Jane Hirschfield, who has been a real friend of to San Diego State for 3 decades. When I first took the job teaching there, I only took it because they kept offering more money and lifting the position up. And then I noticed you could retire in 5 years. And I thought, well, that's not too bad. I'll go there and live by the ocean for 5 years and leave. Now, 30 years later, I'm still there. But Jane was one of the poets. Immediately, I was kind of shocked when I took this position. All these people started writing to me and saying, could you bring me? But Jane's letter was a little different. It said, she said, I'd like to come down and read some poems for you. And I said, well, I liked her work. I was just coming to know it. We don't have any money. She said, that's okay. I'll drive down from the Bay Area and I'll buy some pots. And she's a horticulturalist, and she'll take them home and she would grow some plants. And I didn't have a place for her to stay, so she came down for nothing, drove down here, and slept on the couch of one of the graduate students in the program. So that was the beginning of our friendship. We've brought her back a number of times, and the last time, or not too long ago, she was showing me some poems for Poetry International. I was doing a special collection for Ilya on poetry in the landscape. And she said, would you like any of these? And so I'll show you the poem that I picked, but the thing that was so funny is she said she couldn't understand why I liked this short poem. Well, if you know her poems now, most of them are quite short. And after this ran, Garrison Keillor picked it up and did it with Prairie Home Companion and so forth. So if you would show that poem, and then we'll do the poem by Ellen Bass. So Jane Hirschfield.
I ran out naked in the sun. I ran out naked in the sun. And who could blame me? Who could blame? The day was warm. I ran out naked in the rain. And who could blame me? Who could blame the storm? I leaned toward 60 that day, almost done. It thundered then. I wanted more, I shouted more. And who could blame me? Who could blame had been before? Could blame me that I wanted more?
It's sort of an austere setting. She was the Seamus Haney visiting writer at the University of Belfast. And when I asked her to record this for us, she couldn't even find a plug in the room. And so it's a stripped down version of Jane. And then I hope that you will take something from this evening and go out and write your own poems of this really interesting city. This is the first time that I've really ridden in a car through Venice. It gave me a whole different idea of what Venice was or is. But to close now with Ellen Bass, and then if all of the PI people would come up here, and we'll see if anyone has any questions.
Hello, this is Ellen Bass, and I'm reading The Lesser Gods. Jupiter's bruised. Something smacked into it on Sunday, leaving a black eye the size of the Pacific. Its strong gravity acting like a shield protecting the Earth. As one astronomer explained, we should thank the giant planet for for suffering for us. I'm not sure Jupiter is a Christ, but as I sit on my front steps reading the paper, garbage and green waste lined up curbside, plastic wheels deep in spent rose petals, sunlight spilling on the blossom-bent spines, I think how easy to be inspired by the more theatrical gods, the sun, the moon, the god of desire, bees throbbing in the throats of these roses, the roses, how natural to praise them. But what about all the modest, neglected deities, the overlooked, who've never had a temple built to them? So this morning I raise my cup of fragrant coffee to the god of mold pulsing in the shower ground, rust eating the bent lip of the paint can, bacteria toiling in the landfill, and all the other detritivores, millipedes, and woodlice, burying beetles. Also the fly god, who lands on my hand, thorax glowing emerald iridescence, and the god of maggots, whose infinite mouth hooks scrape the corpses of reindeer and doves, raking our own humbled flesh after our visit to this small planet. They graze, filter, scavenge, and browse.
Wow.
So, does anyone have any questions about PI? Is there anything that we can answer for you?
I'm just glad to know that it's going on and that it's still supported, because we hear of universities pulling their support for journals that we've loved for decades, and so it's wonderful that it still exists. Long may it live.
Hear, hear.
One of the ways it's able to, and this is one of the things that I always fight for when it comes to student scholarships and so forth, get it endowed, as though we have an endowment. It's not a giant one. We couldn't begin to run the journal on simply that endowment, but it's a placeholder, and it says, don't mess with us. You don't want to.
And the staff did that. The staff got the endowment.
No, it was actually a man.
Versus the university.
Neither.
Okay.
It was a man. It came through the university, but a man who had been a world traveler, and he wanted a journal, and he said that the only thing he wanted was that it would be of the world.
Wonderful.
And it was his mother was a poet, and so it was in memory that he gave us the money.
Wonderful. Are we allowed to know who that is or was?
Edwin Watkins.
Okay. Wonderful.
What a wonderful reading tonight. Thank you all so much. I know there are a lot of poets here tonight, so what do you look for when you're looking at so many submissions?
Hi, my name is Luis again. Hi, friend. I know you hate Submittable, but I live in Submittable. And depending on our contest, we look for various things. I think in any poem, we look for scale, movement, musicality. Are they paying attention to line breaks? Especially working closely with Blas Falconer. This past semester, we've been looking very closely at what people are doing when they break the line. Are they being intentional? When it comes to our chapbook contests, I think we are looking for a chapbook that is expansive. And the thing about a chapbook is that it privileges brevity. There's a smaller number of poems in a collection. We do tiny chapbook contests. But we still want that feeling of standing before a mosaic where the parts piece together to mirror a whole. And so with that, you're welcome to write about anything as long as, Blas or Sandra or one of our judges is going to think it does it works to that scale that we're looking for.
Yes.
Does Poetry International have an explicit mission that you could tell us?
Explicit. I would say that we do. And what would you say, Louise? I'm curious, because we've worked together now for 2 years.
I would say it's putting poets in a conversation on this international scale. But I mean, again, especially recently, it's really is finding the best words in the best order and having them be in conversation. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we often run into is people have a political agenda, and that's not what we're looking for. And so, for instance, with the Armenian diaspora, we can all be engaged and have a sense of who we think should be protected in this, and yet that's very complex. And so I had to, talking with the writers of this group, I said, we can't have a political agenda. This is writers in conversation. And once we have a political agenda, then we've lost the whole essence of what it is we're trying to do with I don't know how successful it can be, but to have that conversation in favor of peace and understanding between cultures, countries.
Thank you.
Let me see, anything else? I'm trying to think if there's anything that I could tell you. As I said, we do clusters of poems in PI Online, and that's BLAS. And then the translation portfolios and the award winners are in the print journal.
I'm not clear about that, so you have a contest for translations, is that?
No, we have
Okay, you said the winners, okay, of the translation portfolios. I'm not
No,
clear.
there are translation portfolios and then there are the winners of the competitions. Sometimes they are translations, but it's open, and the guidelines are on the dreaded submittable. But for instance, this time we have 2 portfolios in Portuguese, and one is a Brazilian poet, Ledo Iro, wonderful portfolio, and the translator is from the Netherlands. And then we have another one that just came to me because we brought her to our Living Writers series at SDSU, and that's Ana Luisa Amaral. And she was actually brought in by the Spanish and Portuguese program at the university, and recently passed on. Was from Portugal, and fabulous. So we're wide open as far as looking for translations. Also, one of the other things, and this would be in PI Online, we're really looking for interesting things for the dispatches. So if you want to write a short piece, one of our competition winners actually wrote a piece about traveling around the British Isles doing environmental work and writing poetry about it. And then someone else, they just did something in PI Online. David Keplinger did something on Milton. So it's really wide-ranging when it comes to dispatches. And so you can write to me, with an idea, and I'll get back to you and let you know if it's something that would work for us. And Sam, you want to talk about what you're proposing?
What I'm proposing?
Yes, the hymn.
Oh yeah, there's a new collection, I think from Harvard I believe it's Harvard Divinity School's press, which the name is not coming to me right now, of hymns by a 5th century Greek saint, Romanos the Melodist, who I think there's only one volume of his work, and he has a giant, he wrote, I don't know how many thousands of verses that are still preserved in the original Greek. And there's only one volume available in English of translated verses, and I think there's a 400-page new translation coming out, I think, in May. So potentially, I floated this idea by Blaz, and I think he told you, Sandra, that I would want to write maybe a book review of it or do an interview with the translator. But yeah, that's
dispatch.
Or a dispatch, maybe.
So, any other questions?
I just want to congratulate you on your longevity. I know how hard that is, and the scope and excellence of your work.
This is Faith Ringgold here, by the way, from Nimrod. Speaking of longevity.
Yeah, 67.
With the journal?
60, well, I was only with it for 48, but it is 67 years old.
Anything else? No. Thank you all. Thank you all.
That's the light.